the problem is not really that I can't see, for example,
Hmm.
it's that I can't do stuff. And when technology is made accessible and I can do those things and be given the ability to do stuff, it almost makes my disability irrelevant because I just do it, a different way.
In this video, I have an amazing conversation with Cam Bodway on his LinkedIn live show called Normalize It. We talk about my experience with digital accessibility in higher education, employment during the pandemic, my experience with cameras and creativity since my vision loss, and more. Comment down below something that you learned from this video or any further questions you have on things that we discussed. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Well, let's just jump into it then. I mean, when we talked before the show, we talked a little bit about the underlying issues in accessibility, things like education, things like unemployment. Let's just start there. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the times accessibility can be seen as this issue where it's just how do you technically figure out how to get your website or product compliant and accessible. But I think the most important part is the other side of the coin, where you have to see accessibility is really about empowering people with disabilities to be able to do things online and interact with the digital world that we live in. Since for the visually impaired community, unemployment rates are very high, upwards of
Hmm.
60%, and education rates are also very low. And a lot of these are because of big physical barriers with technology that doesn't make that process very easy for people in the blind community to have success in school and work like anybody else. And so I think accessibility really is about empowering people to get an education, to work,
Hmm.
because I think the biggest problems in the blind community can be solved by technology and having it be made accessible. Because it's like the problem is not really that I can't see, for example,
Hmm.
it's that I can't do stuff. And when technology is made accessible and I can do those things and be given the ability to do stuff, it almost makes my disability irrelevant because I just do it, a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
You said about higher education there for a second. I want to know, can you give me maybe a concrete example in higher ed, textbooks, maybe even, for example, website? Like, what is it? What's a number one barrier that you can give me as an example for higher education or just education in general?
yeah. So in university, um, I went to Cal State San Marcos and had a great experience there. But there are definitely lots of challenges with technology. I did very well in school, but the hardest part was just working to make things accessible. And it's great seeing that there's more and more online textbooks and online coursework, but and you would think, oh, it's good, it's online, it's not on paper. How great that it's more accessible.
Hmm.
But if I have a um, online textbook that has is I'm not able to interact with my screen reader on, nor is there any function to play and have it read out loud.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or if when do the homework assignments, it was interesting. Like in my first couple semesters, sometimes those interactive like simulators would
Hmm.
have zero screen reader support.
Oh, yeah.
So then I'm taking way longer trying to magnify my screen. I'm required to get extra help. But then throughout as the semesters went on, you could slowly see improvements in the accessibility. And then the semester after I left college, or after I after I graduated, someone reached out to me and told me was asking me how's your experience with the accessibility of this program, and it was quite poor. But now the Cal State system, I believe some of the schools have adopted that if a professor wants to use a certain textbook or
Yeah.
simulator, it has to be accessible for all students. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
How do the profs respond in those types of scenarios? Are they generally accommodating, or do you meet resistance? I mean, like how? I'm kind of curious about like the person itself behind, or the lecturer. How are they responding to a lot of these either technical changes or maybe even, trying to get there and understand accessibility from their point of view too?
yeah, definitely. I think before every semester, I would meet with my professors and kind of just share, this is my deal and this is what I need. And I think a lot of professors, they just they don't necessarily know what to do because it's a new experience that
Hmm.
they're not familiar with. And I think many were they were open to help and probably I wouldn't blame them, maybe slightly not overwhelmed, but just confused, which I would expect them
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be. And I think it was up to me to confidently communicate what I needed. And I think for a lot of professors, it can be overwhelming as there's more requirements for them to provide accessible coursework, and they're not, technical experts in making PDFs and PowerPoints accessible.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's putting like added pressure on them, um, but it's kind of like a team effort with me, with different departments, like disability services at the school, the like tech support and the professor. It's like definitely a team sport as everyone's like figuring it out.
Yeah, yeah. You're making me think of something that's quite common, I think, in our world, which is we as accessibility professionals or consultants, we want to do good so well that we'll launch into this way of speaking to either companies or organizations, universities, what have you. And we almost bring this kind of like shame and blame kind of style, like, you don't care. But sometimes I wonder if it's more of they just don't know. And you're kind of touching on that. Whereas maybe a professor would be like, I'm just confused. I don't know anything about this. I've never heard of this issue before. Maybe it's a guest lecturer, right, who doesn't normally speak in a place of higher education, and this is the first time they've had to make a PowerPoint accessible. What are your thoughts on that when I just say something like that? Because I know it's a really big hot topic
Yeah.
now in the world of accessibility. How do we approach accessibility from a more, I want to say, holistic point of view, or a more empathetic point of view to the people who are,
Mhm.
trying to bring it in?
Yeah, I think accessibility needs to continually be seen as a human issue and be humanized, because I think you can approach a school and show them all these places on how poor their accessibility is, and it could come across as maybe shaming somebody for how bad it is.
Hmm.
And then if you're just showing data, to show all that's wrong, then they could flip and show data and say, this only affects such a small percentage of our students, which is kind of the other side, like because it takes a lot of work.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but I think if you don't look at it as a small percentage of the students, but more humanize it and share the stories of those students,
Mhm.
and more so share the challenges that they face, because like people can better understand the challenges I face versus like the problem at hand with my technology and things I'm trying to access.
Yeah.
And I think we rather than I think we need to have more so, like applaud people for taking just improving things 1% better, because
Hmm.
like it's a massive undertaking and slight changes like are have massive differences for me,
Yeah.
that I would continually to see. So just like celebrate those small changes, um, and just make sure to humanize it and show uh, the challenges that students are facing versus looking at just like the statistics and stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit and wonder, do you have an example of that, like a 1% change maybe to somebody, or like in tech or what have you, that would be like a really easy fix that to you just made like a world of difference? And it could be in like PowerPoint or websites or what have you.
Yeah. Jeez.
I
Uh,
know I kind of threw that at you.
No, you're good. It just I'm just like there's like a lot of ways I could go. I think from one angle, personally for me, having the right technology goes a super long way.
Hmm.
Um, for me, like I had a Windows laptop with JAWS and then switched to now a 16-inch MacBook Pro, with VoiceOver, and like that was just very helpful. I think like part of it is coming up with little solutions that make a big difference for me.
Hmm.
Like having like when the professor's explaining statistics on the board on his computer, figuring out, all right, let's go into Google Hangout and share your screen so I could follow along on my computer. Um, and I think just little things like um, just labeling buttons on the like student online access portal
Yep.
thing, um, just makes just actually having screen reader support and making little things to like label buttons and headings. Um, just slight things make something from not really at all screen reader interactive to okay, I can actually start to
Right,
do
right.
this, and it makes me do things much faster. Um, and it is
Yeah.
just like those tiny changes.
You heard it here first, folks. We should be prioritizing labels and headings instead of image alt text. Okay, you heard it here from Blake first, man. There's lots
Yeah,
of ways, right? That it just tends to be a big focus on alt text all the time. It's all kind of sometimes we ever talk about or start with. But I'm glad to hear
yeah,
that. Now when we talked about this whole show a little bit before, we talked about meeting users halfway, and I thought that was a really interesting concept. And I know we've kind of brushed on it a little bit here, but what did you mean by meeting users halfway? And I want to kind of take the conversation in that direction after this, because I think it's a really interesting concept and a really important one as well. So did you want to start that off, and maybe we can talk about that?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was a great something for I formulated in my head that I just feel like really covers a lot of things, and um, I I feel like in the world of accessibility, there can be a lot of pressure where to tell tech companies, all right, you have to make all your products 100% accessible and work with people with disabilities, and it operates on the assumption that all people with disabilities, and me just speaking on for the blind community, like they all know how to use their technology well. Um, but the reality is that a lot of people in the blind community um, aren't like super good with technology.
Hmm.
Like only a smaller percentage of people one need to use screen readers, but also just like know how to use screen readers and
Hmm.
use them
Yeah.
well. Um, and yeah, and not knowing different magnification softwares, and they just also just don't know the right tools to be using.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think in my situation, like I've tried to work incredibly hard to find the best tools to use, and I you know it was always interesting in college when professor would ask, "How long does this assignment take you guys?" And for certain ones, people would say 1 hour, and then at times I'd find myself saying, just in my head, like 3 hours, four
Yeah.
hours,
Right.
because I'm spending all this extra time to make this accessible and make it work. And I
Yeah.
think tech companies need to meet users halfway by making their websites and products work with assistive
Hmm.
technologies. And then it's like on the other side, the users need to be like, all right, come on, guys, like um, we need to learn our assistive technology and tools, and so that we can actually access these things like
Yeah.
they're being made accessible. And I think the pandemic really kind of like heightened or
Yeah.
brought that issue up too.
What I think is really interesting when I talk to someone who maybe lost their sight, I'll just use that as an example, at a younger age compared to someone who is gradually losing their sight over time and maybe loses their sight at the age of 60, something like that. And the difference, of course, in technology, let's say aptitude, is going to be huge, right? But even
Mhm.
if we're not talking about disabilities, my grandmother does not use Facebook, right? Like I will
Mhm.
not get her on anything like that. She's definitely not watching, this LinkedIn. But they're, to someone who's younger, maybe they're going to be more apt, they're going to be more comfortable getting on these types of platforms and, getting used to technology, anything new that kind of comes your way. So just the idea and the understanding, I feel that some people who are just younger and comfortable with their tools and technology, they can get through a lot of the issues a lot faster and a lot easier than someone who, suddenly lost their sight or became disabled later in life, and all of a sudden has to work through the learning process as well as they're kind of learning the new world too. So that's a really interesting conversation to have. You mentioned there quickly about the pandemic. I know we're going to talk about that like a lot more too, which is really neat. So how has the pandemic affected people with disabilities from your point of view? And I've got a whole bunch of opinions on that too, because I've heard from my community as well how the pandemic has affected them. But I'd love to hear from your point of view. How has the pandemic changed the way you work, the way you learn, the way you do things? And yeah, let's jump into that.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many perspectives on this, and I hope to bring a positive light to the pandemic and how it, or more so positive effects that it did have. because I guess the start of the pandemic was like my last year university, and then going into starting my career after. Um, and initial reactions was like, for for me as someone who's good with using their technology, I was like, this is awesome. uh,
Yeah.
in terms of, I don't have to worry about getting to school. Um, all sorts of things, like now the board is right here on my computer screen, um, rather than up on the wall, which I never see,
Hmm.
um, and way easier to follow along in class. Um, Now every assignment for everybody has to be is digital, so it's not like I'm turning in something digitally and others are turning in things on paper. Um, and then just like a neat thing was, I have severe central vision loss and I can't see people's faces, recognize faces. So, like first week of the pandemic being on Zoom, like I'm like magnifying my screen, looking
Yeah.
at all my classmates, and it's just one of those neat little things. But like going to college as a vision impaired person can be isolating in ways,
Hmm.
if you're not seeing and interacting with people, especially for me growing up with perfect vision and being such an extroverted person. um, I think so many things that the pandemic just allowed uh, things to work better for me, but also, on the other side, like for students with disabilities that weren't good with their technology, it was like one of the worst things that could happen,
Hmm.
because they were then super forced to have to figure out their assistive technology, or they didn't have the in-person um, support. But yeah, that's kind of like for school before I kind
Yeah.
of share with
Yeah.
working and
And
stuff as well.
if I could just add to that, like it's
Yeah.
obviously that not everyone, I mean, no one's the same. So we can't say a blanket statement that it was beneficial for all users
Yes.
or students or, everyone with disabilities, right? I just want to bring out, I've heard that users who have hearing impairment, they love the fact that Zoom now has captions, right? That's benefited a lot of people. They can now have conversations where they don't need to rely on a separate phone or even just a lip reading, because it becomes a lot of uh, a great reduction of barriers to be able to
Hmm.
join a Zoom call and be able to have that. Also, I've heard from people who have anxiety or ADHD, all of a sudden their anxiety levels or their levels of focus have gotten better because they can now work in their own environment, how they choose to have that environment. I just want to take a quick pause here and say, if anyone has any questions for myself or Blake at the end of this call, we are going to be taking questions at about the 45-minute mark. So please put them in the chat or the comment section, and I'll be putting them up on screen and we'll be addressing them a little bit later. But so, I mean, how else has maybe the pandemic affected, either yourself or other people in the community? Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for like for in terms of work, is the best thing that could happen was like uh, making more remote work opportunities, or just
Yeah.
normalizing remote work, to where when I was in my last semester of university, I was able to not just be constricted to places close to me, not being able to drive, not having, like, just having places close to me was uh, just like a limiting factor.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and then now to be like, okay, I could approach all these remote work opportunities, was great. And then in the interview process, um, I didn't have to worry about, like, obviously I did like share some accommodations I would maybe need, but didn't have to like worry about getting to work. This goes for school and with working. Like I could sit in the comfort of my home office and like have all the tech set up I needed, and like so that I wouldn't have to go to work and they wouldn't have to like provide things.
Yeah.
So that was like just made that transition very comfortable, and I think also takes a lot of ease off employers who might have any hesitation or just reservations from hiring people with disabilities.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so that was like, yeah, just like a great experience to just make that transition, and now to normalize it, and like we're approaching other work opportunities, like remote work was a thing where I was first doing a remote sales opportunity, and then did a marketing job last year, and that job was like just 2 miles away. So
Mhm.
what was really cool is like I could work from home or I could go in person, where it's like now you could pick up your work and put it anywhere,
Yep.
which gives greater access to work for everybody, but makes the accessibility of it that much
Yeah.
more valuable. And it was cool to see that all these companies just being like, "Whoa, okay, uh, our world is so much more digital. Like we have to figure out the accessibility." And seeing things improve there was like it's just great to see.
Yeah. Yeah, man, you remember me running you the stories at the beginning of the pandemic. I had some clients who had a hard time getting on their VPN at the very beginning because everyone all of a sudden had to go on, bring their laptops home and things like that. And it just crashed the VPN and everything. And like, look at that. Look at what the pandemic has done. It's opened up all these kind of new ways of working and things. And I really encourage employers, anyone who's listening, to talk about having those conversations about how can we continue with a blended style of work. I mean, it only really helps out to everybody, to able-bodied employees or employees with disabilities. I mean, it doesn't matter. This blended style really can help, and being open to that conversation as well. Um,
Yeah,
Talking about that
definitely.
conversation, though, how do we bring up this conversation? I just kind of left this as an open-ended question here. In your opinion, how do we even bring up this conversation around disability? Do you have any thoughts around that? I know it's quite like that's a big topic in and of itself, but how do you approach the topic? How do you bring either your disability or having to talk about that? How do you bring that up?
Yeah. I guess very simply put, I think to have the conversation is like you have to bring it up. And it's it's so simply put, but I say that because it can be a talking about disability accommodations in the workplace, or being a able-bodied person and wanting to improve the accessibility of your website or product within your company. Like, I think people just need to just start having the conversation and bring it
Yep.
up, because I think there's a lot of like hesitation or worries about um, what people might say, or it just we may oversensitize it in ways. But I
Mhm.
think sometimes when, for myself, I can struggle with being misunderstood for the challenges I face and the things I deal with, and I want to feel understood. And the only way I'm going to feel understood, the only way things are going to be made more accessible, is if you ask questions. um, and I think asking broad questions
Okay.
to people is like a great way to just get the other person talking. Whether if you're trying to understand a person with a disability, if you're trying to understand a coworker or a manager's thoughts on accessibility, asking broadly just to like start the dialogue, um, versus like, because sometimes people can specifically ask things and put
Yeah.
almost like their answer or opinion in the question. But
Okay. Yeah.
j-
Yeah.
just kicking off the conversation and asking broadly can lead to lead is a start to solutions on whatever is around disability and accessibility you want to see. But
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that idea of having broad conversations. And I think it highlights an employer who is maybe open to having the conversation too. It starts that safe space kind of environment. I know we're talking a lot today about visual disabilities, but with the invisible disabilities that a lot of people have as well, it is quite challenging to talk about it. I know I know have someone in the family who has ADHD. It's very difficult for him to talk about it. Doesn't really understand how to bring that up sometimes with the employer because it's difficult to have focus and I won't get too much into it. But having those broad conversations about it, having those open conversations, I think is just so critical to creating that safe space where maybe you'll start to feel like your manager, your employer, your HR department, whatever it is, companies large and small, are willing to have that conversation, are open to have
yeah,
that conversation. And I think there's ways that we can start to bring that up, which we probably won't be able to get to. Of course, we can't cover every single scenario today, but I
of
love that,
course.
starting to ask broad questions and starting
Yeah.
to expand upon that.
And if I could, I'll just jump into like
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
thought of a concrete example. Like uh, if you're like asking a coworker or hiring a person with disability, um, like rather than saying like, so like, are you able to write up Word documents with your screen reader. Um, like rather than very specifically asking, and that question could sound like they're doubting someone's ability to do that. Just saying like, so how do you access your work with
Oh
the
yeah,
technology
yeah.
that you use? Um, and then also if it's a conversation on accessibility, rather than approaching a manager and saying like, why do we have 100 accessibility errors on our website and they
Mhm.
haven't been fixed? It's like, oh my gosh, like you put them in a weird spot versus asking, hey, like what are your thoughts on accessibility, and how we could just address that. Um, I, that's where I found better
Yeah, yeah.
better luck.
No,
But I
no, I
just want
think
to give two examples there.
absolutely. No, I love that because what you're giving an example of, I think, is an open-ended question, right? We're not
Mhm.
asking something that, forces someone to answer a yes, no, can you write a Word document? Can you create a presentation? Because I think that creates a bias, right? Doesn't that create the expectation in that question is that no, you can't do it. So,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure I hear the no before I write or check a box, right? But then
right.
opening up the question and saying, well, how would you do that? Right. Just opening up that opportunity and to any, managers, business owners in the call, having that open-ended question saying, you know, uh, being open to being open to whatever the response is too, just really starts that dialogue and I like I said, opens that safe space. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
Yeah, you're on it.
Okay,
We're on
okay,
the same
great.
page.
So let's switch gears here. Okay, so we've talked a lot about employment, and this is great so far. But I want to hear more about you. I want to hear more about Blake and Adapting Site. What are you here for, Blake? What is Adapting Site? I want to hear more about that. I want to hear more about how, like, what the channel's about. Where are you going with the channel? Like, what's your favorite thing to showcase? Let's jump into that for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a super exciting thing to be able to start adapting site just as like this media brand to talk about technology and its accessibility for visually impaired people, and create content on the YouTube channel to really help teach visually impaired people technology, to share the importance of accessibility, and also share how I make content creation accessible. And I think from what I shared earlier, kind of connects to it where there's tech companies need to meet users halfway,
Hmm, hmm,
and with the other side of that being that vision impaired people need to understand their technology.
hmm.
Like I think there's a bit of a dilemma there where there's two sides, and I think sometimes we could just look at one side or the other,
Yeah.
and I think most of the times it can be forgotten about that the user needs to know their technology, and the technology company needs to know the importance of accessibility and how to do it. And I think perspective needs to be brought on both sides. And I just want to figure out like how can I bridge that gap where I've been through just a lot of hardships through
Hmm.
all the things I've been through, and technology is definitely it's a very emotional thing when the amount of challenges I've faced wanting to throw my computer off the roof, just dealing with technical difficulties. It's like
Yeah.
I figured a lot out. So how can I shorten somebody else's learning curve?
Yeah. I love that.
Is just a great thing to be able to do. And since my vision loss happened, I grew a huge passion for using cameras.
Hmm.
Um, I just I got a GoPro and I'd go places, take a photo, come home, magnify it on my big screen, and be like, whoa, like that's
Yeah.
all that was there. And slowly we just like, what if I get good at this? And
Yeah. Yeah.
um, got
You're
just got better and better at it. Is that what you're
Your
saying,
stuff is
Tony?
so cool. Like, I gotta say, your stuff is so good. Like, looking at some of the places you go adventuring in, I just think it's like, first off, up here in Canada, it's still a frozen wasteland right now. Okay, it's getting a little bit warmer, but you and I before this, we had conversations about like camping and these cool places. Then I went to check out your channel, and man, you got the most amazing like images and videos of like the landscape where you are. And geez, like how do I even describe those the formations? But to you told me a really neat story about why GoPro, like the camera gave you sight after sight loss, and you say that very specifically in one of your videos, and I think it's just so cool. Because actually, I think you said it's a bit of it's a bit funny that you want to get good at videos even though you have vision loss, and you kind of put it in a way that's like, yeah, I'm going to get good at this, So why don't you tell me a little bit more about that, like what the camera was and how it gave you sight after sight loss? You started it, and I just wanted to jump in there and talk more about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And first of all, it's like it's such a cool feeling where, I'll get to that as I explain actually. Yeah, so I got a GoPro and quickly found out that it was a great camera that kind of indirectly was kind of accessible. First of all, it's incredibly simple to use. It's
Hmm.
just a couple buttons, and it's a super wide angle camera, and everything's in focus. So I just point it in the direction I want it to go, and it'll take a good picture or video.
Hmm.
And it also connects to the GoPro app. So I can't use that like tiny little screen on the back of a GoPro,
Right.
but with magnification and voiceover on my phone, like I could adjust all the settings on there or see the viewfinder bigger on my phone. And so I was quickly like, okay, like I think this could work. Uh,
Yeah.
and then what was just like a powerful feeling is like as I would start to take a better photo, or make a cool video and getting like a good response from somebody was like a very cool feeling. Like for
Hmm.
you to say like that you thought like the footage looked really cool of the like look landscapes I was at. It's like it's a pretty awesome compliment and feeling to be like, you know, I couldn't see that very well at all in person, but I could capture sight
Yeah.
around me and not only see it better for myself, but share that perspective with other people is very powerful. And I think it's like, I have a condition where there's no cure, and I'm I'm totally cool with that. It's like this is who I am and how I was made. But it's like so awesome that you can find technology that can solve that problem in a unique way, where it's such a cool feeling to get little, capture. I say sight because sight is just like the visual information that we get around me, and if
Hmm.
I could just consume that another way, like that, I'm cool with that. And then I think from there it was like I've uh I've learned so much technically on how to like thrive as a student and
Hmm.
in internships and work, like all sorts of things. And it's cool when I was like, I downloaded Adobe Premiere Pro because I got it for free through school, and I'm like, I know this is super complicated for anybody to figure out, but like, I'm just gonna do it, like, and just I think everything is figure outable with technology,
Yeah.
um, and since then it's been amazing to now last year having conversations with Adobe and consulting them through research on improving the accessibility of their creative apps and
Oh
uh, just
yeah. Yeah.
w- just working to like uh, where I used to think, oh, it's so ironic, like the blind guys into taking photos and making videos, but I'm like, no, like if you have problems with mobility, like there's also sorts of tools to get around better, crutches,
Hmm.
wheelchair, like all sorts of things, like so you can have better mobility. So it's like if you can't see well, why wouldn't you use something that could actually see well
Right.
for
Right.
you?
Because I can
Yeah.
hear the argument in my mind of maybe some previous clients. I hope no one's on the call right now. And by the way, if anyone from GoPro or knows someone from GoPro, like get this guy, tell them to call Blake. Wouldn't it be cool? You get a GoPro, maybe a couple of GoPros for free, something like that. Anyway, sidebar. But
Yeah.
I can hear it already. I can hear the arguments in my mind from some client saying something like, well, we make cameras and blind people don't use cameras, so let's not make it accessible, right? Like I can hear the argument in my head, and it's an exhaustive argument. First off, like it doesn't make any sense. We all know
Uh-huh.
that in our community that doesn't hold it doesn't hold a candle to anything. That doesn't make any sense. And so
Mhm.
I mean, you're an example. By the way, how does the GoPro app work with voiceover? I don't know if you use a
Yeah.
iOS or Android, but like how is it? Like is the accessibility pretty good with it?
Yeah, so I'll answer that to address like a bigger point to what your preface there. Um, so I also use a Canon M50 now. That's like my primary
Oh,
camera. It's like
nice.
a mirrorless camera.
I know
And
there's Canon in my network. Okay, so any Canon people should be listening up right now.
um, and then so same idea. They have the Canon Camera Connect app
Yeah.
where same concept to where I have an iPhone, and with both of the apps, it's like you know, a lot of time I'm going around with my screen reader, swiping, touching on things, and it'll just say button, 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 as we're familiar with, where I'm like, tell me the setting that I'm changing, where it's like, uh, you know, you said all the reactions you're thinking of people saying, why should we make cameras accessible? Like,
Right?
and all the reasons. It's like I wouldn't approach it as like, oh, like make your camera accessible. I'm like, if you started by labeling your buttons on this app or
Right?
making some of these buttons bigger, which would be better for everybody because for some reason they're really small and just the design isn't great for anybody. Like you already made something that is making it more accessible. Like you're some of the stuff, it's like they're like 90% there, where it's not like the next whatever company camera needs to have a full screen reader and magnification on the back screen and have like AI saying what's the viewfinder is seeing. It's like no,
Right.
no, no, like one step at a time. Like grab the like it's okay to grab the low hanging fruit because I'm so close to having things more fully accessible. Um, but I also have to say I was at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference
Yeah.
yesterday, and Sony was there, and I have to give them a huge shout out. Their Sony A7 or Sony A7 IV is starting to have screen reader support
What?
for the menu on the back
No
of the
way.
camera.
Hold on. We got to take a pause there. So the Sony A7, what was that? A7 IV
Yeah.
has a screen, like a built-in screen reader in the actual camera itself.
Yes. So
What?
it's like
Everyone who's at CSUN, I got to hear more about this. If you have any information on this Sony camera, like I got to hear more about this. So we gotta have
yes.
a conversation about that. That's so cool. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like it's like very beta. Um, but they're doing it. And it's super exciting to see that they're already thinking about it. And I spoke to someone there who is a like vision impaired photographer and videographer that works for Sony, and pretty crazy that this is something that they're working towards. And I think what's also really cool and allows me to like use a mirrorless camera is like the autofocus technology is getting
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
So, and that's the biggest part where it's like I can kind of frame up a shot, but I'm relying on that autofocus all day.
Yeah.
And Sony has incredible autofocus technology,
Hmm.
which is also allowing it to be more accessible. And they're going to get the menus to have more screen reader support, and that will evolve ideally into as like you're changing your shutter speed. It's going to say out loud 1/100th,
That's so
1/80th, one
cool. That is
whatever
so
it
cool.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah, I could go off on that all day, but it was a very powerful perspective to show like, hey, like that they're working towards it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and what a cool competitive edge that you could have showing like I just imagine marketing material from Sony highlighting visually impaired photographers. And I think, yeah, you're gonna sell people who have any vision problem, but also like uh, I think a lot of people are gonna just be seeing like, okay, Sony's doing the right thing. Like
Yeah.
that's something I want to be a part of, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I used to talk to a lot of photographers in a previous job, and it was really I did tech support for a camera company, and I would hear these issues, and they would say like the viewfinder is so small, and I can't put my glasses up next to it. So
Hmm.
imagine if you could just have something audibly to change the settings, and I mean they are probably not legally blind, but the benefits of having it right there is you can change the settings while still having your eye on the viewfinder trying to capture your subject. It would be like
Yep.
so beneficial to once again everybody.
Ah,
That's really cool. See, I'm a big Sony fan too. I've got a ZV-1. That's my camera that I use whenever I need to do shooting. Not this one. I got some Mevos here, which is by Logitech, and they're pretty good too. Actually, I've never checked
nice.
their app for accessibility. Now you got me. I never thought about that. I never thought to check it, but they've been pretty good there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Nice.
we're almost at time now, but I'm kind of curious. We got 5 minutes left. I want to know when you're outdoors, like what was your favorite place to shoot? Like where do you go, and like what's your favorite place, and maybe why is that?
Yeah. I think yeah, no, I'm been super blessed to have traveled a lot and experienced a lot of different places. Um, I think one of my favorite places, I'll share a quick story, like is Anza Borrego. It's like the desert in like the desert, which is kind of like the inland like third of San Diego County,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I live in San Diego, and there's this like yeah, just lots of super cool landscape and lots of landscapes where like you see pictures of it and you go and take a picture there and you're like, man, that was not not close to how it was. And there's this one spot called Slot Canyon, and it's like this very narrow canyon that you walk through, like you can just like shoulder width apart part of the time. Um, and there's like this cool rock that has fallen and like stopped part
Oh,
way above you.
yeah. Yeah.
And like I'd been there like 4 times, and I would always try to take a picture of it to try to get the rock and the light coming through. But then it just looks like this muddy, overexposed image with the light coming in because it's very dark on the bottom, light on the top.
Yeah.
And then like the last time I went, I like I had an ND filter, um, in which basically allowed me to expose the image for the dark part and the bright part,
Yep.
and get a clean overall image. And then I shot it and underexposed a little bit so that I could bring up the exposure more when editing, and like it came together on photo and in video, and I was just like so proud. Just like there's one spot that I went over and over, and like finally got it, and it's more like a picture I could see online and look at my picture and be like,
Yeah.
yeah, my picture's better. And like it's just cool to do that, you know.
Yeah. That was in your video, right? Where you're kind of like shimmying through that really narrow kind of cave, right?
Yeah, that was my brother. Yeah, he was like climbing up it a
That's
little
such
a little bit.
cool
Yeah,
stuff. Ah, man, like, see, yeah. Anyway, we can go on and camping and stuff. I know you go camping a lot. That's kind of where we connected earlier in
yeah,
prior conversations as well. But yeah. So hey, I'm gonna jump to some questions here because I saw some really neat questions that maybe we can tackle in the chat. Let me pull up
absolutely.
a few of them here. Okay, so number one, this is gonna be pretty big. So Janardan says, so a few questions for Blake, and thanks for putting this together. He says, number one, are most marketing related books, textbooks, or otherwise accessible? Maybe, and then the second one is so much of marketing as in visual parts or parts of data visualization like Google Analytics. How do you deal with that? And then number three, what in sales/marketing jobs, what you've done was not accessible? So there's three really great questions here. Let's
Yeah.
just talk them one by one. The first one being, is most marketing, like marketing material, I suppose, in books, textbooks, and otherwise accessible? Maybe we'll just start there.
Yeah. I'd say it kind of like depends on the subject. And I would just or the subject within marketing, and I'd say the places where you're going to get the biggest inaccessible parts is when you look at like market research and stuff, or just data analytics,
Mm-hmm.
and you're dealing with a lot of Excel or graphs and statistics. It's like so there certain images are going to require super heavy alt text to try to describe it,
Yep.
or it's going to require me to just magnify and figure it out. Um, but then like Excel is like, there is like screen reader support with Excel,
Yeah.
but it's like it's very hard to use even if you know how to use a screen reader well.
Yep.
But then like when there's tables and stuff in a textbook and they're just an image, there's no way to interact with that
Of
table.
course. Yeah.
But then I feel like tables are kind of the hardest thing to interact with as a screen reader user. Um, so it's like it's something where personally I would like just magnify.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of like just conceptual marketing things that were easy to learn, just like the theory and whatnot
Mm-hmm.
around. So it just kind of depends.
Yeah. That's a really good answer. So what I'm hearing though is the big one, and it sounds, the fact that you brought up tables. I mean, as a developer myself, we know that tables can be a really big pain in the you know what. That's just
Yeah.
the reality of them. Even more so in things like PDFs, where you need to maintain that structure throughout.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of people, again, as I built PDFs before, they just slap an image in there instead of having to build the whole structure and say, well, good enough, but it's not good
Yeah,
enough, right?
for sure.
Number two to that was talking about visual models and data visualization. How do you handle that? How does this how like the example here is through Google Analytics, but I guess it can be
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, so last year, I was working for in digital marketing for a mountain bike gear company called Tasco, and yeah, I had to do a lot of Google Analytics, Google Ads, Facebook ads, and just yeah, lots of programs where um, most of it is just data analytics and tables and stuff.
Sure. Yep.
And this isn't necessarily a great technical response around accessibility, but it kind of makes a point out of it. A lot of times I was just like, I'm not even going to try to use this with my screen reader. I'm just going to zoom in. Um,
Sure.
but a lot of times it's using a screen reader plus magnification, which that's where kind of category I fall into, and a lot of people
Mhm.
do as well. So as I'm going around Google Analytics, I'm zooming in, and as my mouse goes over certain numbers and tables, I like it'll read out loud the numbers that are in there, and then it's just like creating setups and
Yeah.
tables in Google Analytics, for example, that like I'm comfortable with, I'm familiar with, like customization on programs can sometimes be like, this is so overwhelming, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it can allow you to make things work better another way. Um, and yeah, and
Yeah.
then when it comes to graphs, it's just like I'm just gonna look at this visually.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it's such a longer conversation to visualize data
Of
and
course.
make
Yeah.
that accessible.
I remember a couple of years ago, the idea was, well, just put a table of data behind any data visualization, and that's good enough. And it threw me off. I did a bunch of research on that once for a client of mine, and let's just use an example like stock data, right? If you're
Hmm.
talking about high, low, open, close, which are the 4 data points on any kind of stock graph, and then what you've got a year of data, and it's broken down into let's say 1 hour, like I'm not going to calculate the math. That's an incredible number. 4 times 365 or whatever amount of days in there. Like, what are you going to get a table with like 6,000 rows? That doesn't make
Hmm.
any sense to be able to navigate through that either. So I think like something like that has to be so summarized in a way that really makes sense to, I
Yeah.
think, all users. Because even, a, a graph is a visual representation of data. To throw data
Yeah.
back at someone who's blind or visually impaired doesn't help them any more than it would help the sighted users, right? That's why we represent them in data visualization. So we should be
Yeah.
summarizing them and bringing it down into some kind of better description. I'm going to jump
Yeah.
to the next question here because we're just running a little bit out of time.
Yeah.
What I've got here is so for Blake. So regarding websites, is there a single worst accessibility mistake that you see over and over and over and over and over? I may have added a few more overs there, but what's the biggest issue that you keep seeing coming up again and again?
Yeah. Uh, my one reaction is like my first reaction was like just the buttons not being labeled, where I can like read the text and stuff to know what's going on, but then to take an action on the website, and when I just hear button, 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 like that is just a massive physical roadblock that is
Yeah,
so
for sure.
simply it can be so simply addressed if you just label the button. But I would also say just like overcomplicated websites.
Okay.
Just like I think it's not necessarily like it's not necessarily like a guideline. Never mind. Scratch that. It's more so like uh, people just need to make simpler, cleaner, nicer websites. And I think that that's just like a general usability thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when there's like so much information and tables and like all these pop-ups going on for their newsletter and a cookies pop up and like the buttons aren't labeled to close these things, like there's
Oh
all
god,
this
yeah.
information coming up. I think for any user to look at land on that page, you're like, what am I supposed to do here?
Yeah.
um so I think just like, and I think that that makes accessibility make more sense, where if you're like, how can we simplify our website
Mhm.
to increase the customer experience and boost conversion value so that
Mhm.
people can get through it better? Like, how can you rephrase accessibility to sound like, that sounds way more enticing to a lot of people,
Right, right.
and would work a lot better for me.
Yeah, I try to talk about, if I'm in front of a bunch of business owners or managers or something like that, I have a conversation around the business of accessibility. And usually it's about that. There's such a huge push towards content simplification, right? You take a wall of text. You don't need a wall of text there. It's not increasing your your ROI, your return on investment, or conversion rate. In fact, it's probably going against it because you've just got so much there.
Yeah.
Reduce, simplify. Obviously,
Uh-huh.
for screen reader users, for you to go through all that text is I've heard from my friends who also use screen readers, they're saying it's just too much. It's just too
Mm.
much. Like reduce. And again,
Yeah.
anyone who's in any kind of UX or UI design style of role, they're going to say the same thing. Adding white space, adding spacing
Yeah.
around here, it just adds to it. All right. Thanks so much, Blake, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more content like this and check out one of these videos here next.